Hello, everyone. Welcome to Ruminate This with Agrarian Solutions. Join us as we explore ruminant nutrition and the impact of mycotoxins. Here, we challenge your curiosity and explore new industry insights and research to optimize your herd's health and performance. All right. Hey, everybody. Welcome back to Ruminate This with Agrarian Solutions. I'm your host, Scott Zaire. And today, if you're listening to this episode, it is the first week of January in the year 2025. And we are doing a couple of things differently in this next year here on Ruminate This, in the sense that we are kicking off season 2 effective in 2 weeks from today. And so today's episode, we're going to be giving you a little sneak peek. I think in the movie world, they call it a trailer. We don't really have the voiceover guy to create a lot of hype today, but I'll do my best. I do have Dr. Roth with me to share some insights on some of our guests that have committed to come on the podcast here in 2025. So we'll be running that by him. But Dr. Roth, as I look at the speaker list for 2025, these are people that have agreed to come on our podcast and visit with us and our audience. And I'd like your take on this overall at first. So one, I'll just read off some of the names here. Dr. Tom Overton, Cornell University, Dr. Mike Van Amberg, Cornell University, Dr. Julio Giordano from Cornell University, not from university, but Mike Overton from Zoetis, Kai Fuller, Texas A&M, Paul Fricke up there at UW-Madison, Dr. Billy Brown out at Kansas State. You know, I think to the listeners, maybe what are you most excited about with that list of guests coming up this year from the academia space?
God, I think it really broadens our subject matter that is covered in these podcasts. And you're bringing in some of the foremost researchers, some of the people who speak most frequently at different producer and scientific conferences. So you're really bringing in some heavy hitters, people who are on the cutting edge of research in the dairy nutrition world.
Yeah. So, Dr. Billy Brown down there in Kansas State, one of the topics that we're going to talk with him about is this developmental programming in calves. Share a little insight on that, Larry.
You bet. With fewer dairy replacements being raised, each one has to count. Each one has to be functioning at their highest level. And Scott, that goes back to my common phrase, day one, week one, month one. We have to know how to keep these calves alive, how to help keep them as healthy as possible. And I'm sure that Dr. Brown will talk about some of the comment of development programming. In other words, there are certain genes that seem to get turned on by the way that we feed these calves. And some of this actually takes place before the calf is even born. And I'm sure he'll make some references to that. So with fewer heifers being raised, and those that are raised are worth a whole lot more money than what they were 10 years ago, each heifer has to count. And that comes back to nutrition and management and understanding that there's things that we could do that help these genes, shall we say, be turned on and help the genes express themselves. So that should be a very interesting and timely topic.
Absolutely. And I'm going to throw another one at you. Hypocalcemia in dairy cows is something we've talked about on this platform before. There's studies that suggest somewhere between 40 and 60% of the cows in this country could be suffering from subclinical hypocalcemia. Dr. Tom Overton out of Cornell has done a lot of work in this area. What are some thoughts you might have about that kind of conversation with Dr. Overton?
You bet. We use that term hypocalcemia. I mean, people say, well, I don't have milk fever. Well, they don't have clinical milk fever. They don't know if they have subclinical because they're not testing enough cows or testing any cows at all. So we know that the cow has a tremendous increase in her calcium demand. And let's face it, if you want to get an argument going among dairy nutritionists, let's talk about dry cow diets and what we should be doing. And I think Tom Overton can bring in some good perspective in both dry cow diets and post-fresh diets in regards to calcium status. So how about let's term it that way, calcium status of these cows. And he's no stranger to some of the controversy in this area, but he always uses research to back up his views. And he and his co-workers there at Cornell have probably done as much research in this area as anybody, other than perhaps Jesse Goff. And I'm sure that Dr. Overton will make some references to Dr. Goff.
Yeah. Dr. Roth, with my background in having spent some time in the genetic side and specifically reproductive consulting,
Mhm.
one of the guys that I looked up to, and honestly, I was a little bit starstruck when he said he'd join us on the podcast, is a guy named Dr. Julio Giordano from Cornell University. He's done a ton of work in reproduction synchronization and developing certain protocols and really taking the work that Dr. Paul Fricke out there at UW-Madison had started and carried that torch a lot. So I'm definitely excited about that. I mean, we talk about reproductive success an awful lot on this podcast.
Mhm.
But Larry, you and I like to use sports references sometimes.
Yeah.
And just for the contemporary listener, I'm going to use the Bill Belichick coaching tree. I think anybody that's an NFL fan knows what we mean when we talk about the
Mhm.
Bill Belichick coaching tree. I'm going to say Dr. Paul Fricke is the Bill Belichick of repro research in the U.S.
Yeah.
Your thoughts there.
I think Dr. Fricke has a tremendous research program, but he's also had a very good researcher development program. And that's
Mm,
two different things. It's one thing to do the research, and no question Dr. Fricke has done that, but he's also developed a number of high quality researchers. That's the researcher tree that you were making reference to. So, yeah, having Dr. Fricke on here will be fantastic. And then to see how he has developed his proteges that are continuing on the research into reproductive success. I mean, let's face it, as much as the dairy producer thinks they're in the business of making milk, they're in the business of getting cows pregnant and staying pregnant. So Dr. Fricke and his students, now researchers, have been as much in the forefront of that as anybody else. So it'll be really neat to see how they are developing this important topic, an important topic for any dairy producer. How do we get cows pregnant and keep them that way?
I recently had a chance to go to the DCRC conference back in November down in Arlington. And I think sometimes, Larry, when you spend your career closer to the front lines in production agriculture, we might go to these conferences and you see the suit and tie of the speakers, the presenters, the researchers that are coming up with the new data and they're talking to us about it. And I will say I appreciated the new perspective. I'm never one to question somebody's work ethic or how they got there, whatever. But it certainly gave me a new perspective when I heard an exchange. It was Dr. Fricke's presentation. Julio was sitting in the back of the audience, sitting in on the
Mm,
presentation. The room is packed. And the exchange between those two individuals reminiscing about the thousands and
mm,
thousands of cows that Dr. Giordano had palpated with ultrasound to look at developing CLs and all this stuff. And it really reminded me that these individuals that are pumping this information out of the universities, they're not afraid to get their hands dirty to help us out.
yeah,
So definitely appreciated that. And I'm sure you
you bet.
experienced that in your career too, feeding
Yeah,
cows. Yeah.
yeah. We got our hands, shall we say, dirty, and we can put that in quotation marks because it was more than just dirt on the hands.
Yes, yes, exactly. So, Larry, from an internal perspective, some of the stuff that we're going to be talking about this year, share with us the mycotoxin reports.
You bet.
When can we expect those?
Yeah. When can we expect those? Well, Scott, we're looking at doing those 2 times a year, so about 6 months apart. So it'll probably be April and October. And we're really trying to make emphasis on our October mycotoxin report covering the new crop corn silage coming in. So the April, we'll talk about what we have been seeing for the 24 harvested corn silage and by extension, the corn byproducts that show up into the TMR. And then in October, we're really wanting to break out what is the old crop versus the new crop. Because what are we going to have to work with for this next year going forward? So we've really taken our forage sampling, TMR sampling program to another level. And now we're starting to develop it even further to be more specific crop versus crop, or crop year versus crop year.
I'm glad you bring that up that way because, as oftentimes, and I go back to my days when I would be in repro consulting, a lot of farm meetings happen in post crop, right? November, December,
Mm-hmm.
January, February, especially the last 2 months of the year, where we're strategizing for what we're going to do the following year. Things we want to improve, we're goal setting, but we're developing strategies. It might be nutritionally, it might be reproductively, it might be financially. Sampling that corn silage as it's being harvested, I think, is a strategic step that has been overlooked a lot. And I'm proud to carry that torch with you, Larry, as encouraging people to safely take some samples as you're ensiling that forage. Don't be afraid to call on us to help out with it.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. And let's develop a
Yeah.
strategy moving forward.
Yeah, I absolutely believe in sampling the corn forage. Let's call it corn forage. It's really not silage. It hasn't gone through the fermentation, but it's easy to call it silage. Let's sample that silage, that corn material, as it's going into storage. Number one, we got to be safe. Man, you get on some of these big farms, and we've got how many tractors on the pile or the bunker, and we've got trucks, wagons coming in left and right. Well, we don't want anybody to get run over, but we really need to know what kind of inventory we're dealing with. What's the starch level? What's the fiber digestibility? It lets the dairy producer and nutritionist do so much for planning what are their needs. Man, we got to go out, we got to buy some corn, we got to get some byproducts because our starch content, starch digestibility will improve over time. But we're going to have a good idea of what our fiber digestibility is. So, plus, we're going to know something about mycotoxins going in. Are we going to have a good year feeding wise, or when we get into this new crop corn, we got some issues that we need to deal with? And the best way to deal with an issue is to know it's there and have a plan going into it. So, Scott, we can sit down November, December, we can say, here's what we've got going on. But if we have samples, nutrition wise and mycotoxin wise, from August and September when we were putting the crop into storage, we could do a whole lot better at coming up with a strategy to successfully deal with this crop. So that's a big emphasis in our testing program. Know what the crop is going into storage.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So, Larry, in the way of research, I view you as kind of the lead guy, kind of leading that charge. We've talked about our DTX research on this platform before. You can go back to episode 2 and 3, I believe it is, of season 1. But, Larry, can we expect any updates on research coming out of Agrarian in 2025?
Yeah, Scott, we're wanting to stay on the forefront of what we're doing for mycotoxin protection, as well as other developments that are coming along.
Awesome. Awesome. I think that's great. I think that's important. And as you've said many times on this platform, have the data to back it up.
Yeah.
Yep. I love it. So, as well, things to look forward to. We're going to be talking with some dairy farmers in season 2, kicking off right here in January with a dairy farmer up in Ontario, Canada, named Dylan Stewardson, who is a Platinum Repro Award winner at DCRC this year. So, we're going to ask Dylan how the heck he did it and how he's going to continue to improve and not go backwards in repro. I also want to give a shout out to one of our listeners that was kind enough to send us some fan mail, Devin Olette. And she's up in Maine with her husband and family on a multi-generational dairy farm. And so, Devin, thanks for reaching out and thanks for having a conversation with me. Since then, I look forward to talking to you more. And as always, folks, if you enjoy this podcast, definitely drop us some fan mail. Drop us an email, podcast@agrsol.com. We'd love to hear from you if you have ideas for topics. So one of the things that Devin had emailed us about, Larry, was multi-generational farming, older style management versus newer ideas. I think there could be some generational transitioning things to talk about. And so we do want to make this podcast for the listener. If you guys have ideas for topics, feel free, podcast@agrsol.com. Reach out to me and I'll see what I can do to come up with resources for you. Larry, go ahead.
Yeah, I think that'll be great having Devin come on. Scott, you've put up a tremendous lineup, top-notch, cutting-edge researchers, and that's all fine and well to have the research, but let's talk to those who are taking that research and applying it out there in the field. So that'll be exciting to have Devin come on, talk about transition from one generation to the next. How do we take the research and apply it? Well, that works well there at that college, but how does it work out here on the farm where we're trying to make money?
Exactly. I haven't talked to her yet, but I'm going to work on it, Larry. So maybe mentioning that she should come on will convince her to come on and have a conversation with us. So with that, everybody, I'm going to let you go for this week. Next week, we're going to continue our Meet the Team series and dive right back into our regular battle rhythm of serving you guys once a week here on Ruminate This with Agrarian Solutions. And again, if you enjoy our podcast, hit that subscribe button, share it with a friend, and we look forward to talking to everybody in 2025. Thank you, Dr. Roth.
All right. Thank you, Scott.
If you found value in today's podcast, please hit subscribe and share. And we look forward to talking to you again next week.